We're going to get started with our training, a virtual training for the long-term monitoring protocol for Ontario's snakes. Many of you know me. I've talked to a lot of you over email or on virtual meetings or in person for some of you, but I'll reintroduce myself or introduce myself for the first time for those of you who I haven't met. My name's Tegan. I am a conservation science coordinator at Ontario Nature, and I coordinate the long-term monitoring protocol for snakes. It's a big project that involves over 40 partners. We're getting close to 70 sites now across the province, and everyone is monitoring for snakes following the protocol that we designed and contributing data to our database. So thank you all for participating in the project and for coming today for a little bit of a review of the protocol. And we'll also be going through the digital data collection options. So some of you might know we piloted a Survey 123 form last year, and we're hoping to continue with that this year and have lots of you use it because it makes things really quick and easy and great. So we'll talk about that as well, and we'll have opportunity to answer questions and chat about some of your specific sites at the end as needed. So that's kind of the plan. I'm wondering, I guess, maybe if any of you want to, you can put in the chat, the group that you're affiliated with or where you do sites or how long you've been part of the project. If you want to introduce yourselves to each other, feel free to do that. But I'm going to get going and get started with the presentation. So first, I just want to let everyone know we've got a brand new story map about the project. So a lot of you know the protocol pretty well. It does have information about the protocol itself, about the background of the project, and it also has some information or some results, some preliminary results. So Sarah's just put a link to the story map in the chat there if you want to check it out at any point. That's where we've started sharing some of our results from the first 5 years of the project. So we're really excited to have that live, and I encourage you to check it out if you want to see some maps and some photos and some figures from the project so far. Okay, so let's get into how the project works. So the first step of joining the project is, of course, choosing a site. So that requires, some thought. And there's a couple of things that I want to remind you all about taking into consideration if you're setting up a new site or if you're expanding, adding more sites to your existing sites. These are things to keep in mind. So first of all is habitat type. For snakes, we want open or semi-open habitats. So that can be, prairies, meadows, forest clearings, alvars, rock barrens, all sorts of different habitats work. Ideally, it will be edge habitat. So somewhere where a more open habitat meets a more closed habitat like forest or woods, forest. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second really important part of where you're putting your site is where is there sunlight. So for the cover boards that we use for this project, we'll get into that setup in a minute. But for the cover boards, snakes like to use them more if they are warm. And so we like to have the boards in locations where there's lots of sunlight, especially lots of morning sun. So the boards get nice and warm in the morning and the snakes can use them to warm up after a colder night. And that's especially important in the spring when it still gets very cold at night. Another thing to keep in mind is, are there snake observations from an area? And sometimes you might not have any snake observations, but you want to find out what snakes are present. And so not having any snake observations is totally fine. But if you do know that snakes have been seen in an area, that's always a good sign that it's good snake habitat. And then the last thing to keep in mind is the accessibility of the site. And so that is a couple of things. First of all, can you get out there fairly easily? The surveys themselves don't take very much time. And so being able to get out to the site and not spend an hour hiking in, for example, makes a big difference in terms of time commitment. And then the other thing is, do you have permission to access that land? So a lot of you are doing this on land that is owned by the organization that you work for, by the land trust or the naturalist group or the university that you're affiliated with. But if you aren't, then it's really important that we get permission from the landowner so that they know that snake surveys are happening on their land and are happy for that to be the case. So on that note, I'm going to touch quickly on permits. Also, it's great to see some of you sending messages in the chat. If you have questions at any point, you can also put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'm happy to address questions as we go. Okay, I was talking about permits. I want to remind everyone that for the most part, we handle permits for this project. So we hold, we have our protocol is approved by the Animal Care Committee. We hold a Wildlife Scientific Collectors Authorization, as well as some other permits, Species at Risk permit for federal land. We're dealing with Species Conservation Act registration for the first time this year, now that the ESA has been removed. So we handle all of those permits. We, for the most part, already hold them, and it's fairly easy to add people to them from our side of things. What we do need is for you to be consistent and prompt with sending us first and last names of everyone who is going to be participating before they participate. So we can add people to our permits during the field season if necessary, but as much as possible, we want to have the names of everyone who will be participating before surveys start. And if someone's joining in, send me those names before they do a survey so that they can be added to the permit and they have permission to be doing the activities outlined in our protocol. So there's a QR code here for the participant registration form. If anyone here hasn't filled that out yet, please do so. If you follow that QR code, or Sarah will send a link in the chat, you can put in, whether you've participated before, if you're planning on participating, and the address and names, most importantly, names of anyone who is participating. If you've already filled this out and you have new people, new names to add to the list, you can send me an email. My email's at the end of the slide, the slide deck, if you don't have it yet. But I think for the most part, most of you have talked to me over email at least. And then the other thing that's really important about the permits is that they are specific to our protocol. And so from our end of things, we've provided a protocol, we've gotten permits based off of that protocol, and we have to report to the appropriate authorities about our results and what we did following that protocol. And so it's also really important that everyone is following the protocol appropriately, following the conditions of the permits, which are outlined in the permits, and also sending in the data that you've agreed to send in to us so that we can report on it to the permit authorities. So, there's a reason that we ask for your data by a certain time. There's a reason that we ask for you to follow the protocols. So just a reminder that, it's not just that we need consistent data to be able for it to be comparable and to be analyzed in a meaningful way at the end of this project, but also we do have a responsibility as the ones who hold these permits to collect the data safely and appropriately, and then also report on what we've done. And on that note, the permits will be coming to you very soon. So if you are waiting on permits, they're coming. We have received them all, so I will be getting those to you very soon. Okay, now if you don't yet have a transect or you're setting up a new one, here's a couple of reminders about what that looks like. So we use 24 plywood boards. They're 4 feet by 2 feet by half an inch in size, and they should be spaced about 5 meters apart in a linear transect. And so that means we don't put our boards in a grid. We have them all in a line, usually along edge habitat, usually not too close to a forest edge. You want them to be getting lots of sun and to be out of the forest for a number of years. So if they're right up against the edge, they're going to get crowded out by trees pretty quickly. And it should also be within a single habitat type, and the boards should be set up at least 2 weeks before surveys start. So if some of you, I think, are setting up new sites this year, it's great to get those boards set up as soon as possible so that you can leave them out in nature for 2 weeks before you start disturbing them. And that just gives snakes a chance to find them and not be disturbed, and for the boards to kind of settle into the natural environment before you start looking under them. Okay, and speaking of starting to monitor them, we are getting to that time of year down here in Southern Ontario, at least. So a couple of reminders about when you start monitoring. Usually, so in the protocol, we have a table with guidelines of like approximate start dates for when to monitor. Around May 1st is a general rule of thumb, but it's important to be paying attention to the temperatures. So we want to start monitoring once snakes are out from hibernation, they're moving around, they're looking for warm, safe, protected cover boards or other cover objects to warm up and shed their first skin and all of that before the summer. So that is usually when overnight temperatures are pretty consistently above 0, and daytime temperatures are consistently at or above 10 degrees Celsius. So it'll vary based on where you're located, but those are the like general guidelines. And then we also have guidelines for when you can actually do a survey. The most important one here is we don't do any surveys in the rain. That means that we sometimes have to reschedule things at the last minute. So please keep that in mind, especially if you're working with volunteers. It's really annoying to show up to a site, have to turn around and go home and come back another time, especially if you're traveling a long ways. So keep an eye on the weather forecast and try and plan accordingly. But it's also going to be important to be flexible. I will say, if you get out to a site, you're doing your survey, you get maybe halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, and it starts to rain, you can finish your survey. That's totally fine. What we don't want is, you're showing up to the site and it's already pouring rain and you're doing surveys and you're disturbing the snakes. It might not seem like such a big deal to us as humans, but for a snake, especially some of the smaller snakes, raindrops landing on them can be, pretty big. And when it's raining, they usually just want to hunker down and stay somewhere hidden and dry and safe. So we try not to disturb them and stress them out too much. Okay, I thought I heard something, but I don't think it was on purpose. So I'm going to continue. Again, if there's questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to take them at any point. Okay, so there's a couple other survey guidelines on here. Air temperature between 10 and 28 degrees Celsius is a general guideline. That's when you're most likely to find snakes. It's also the upper end of that is especially a health and safety concern. For us, we don't want to be out there when it's too hot, but also the snakes don't want to be out there when it's too hot. So both things are at play there. And similarly, we don't want to be out doing surveys when the wind is really, really strong. So above a 5 On the Beaufort Wind scale, we don't do surveys. Okay, next, let's do a little review of the timing and frequency of our surveys. So like I said, we start in early May usually. Some of you might be starting already this month, and some of you might be a little bit later in May. We ask our partners to do a minimum of 8 surveys, and those should be spaced apart about 5 to 9 days. So on average, it's about 1 per week. Sometimes they're a little further apart, but they should be no more than 9 days in between each survey. And so usually that takes people to early or mid-July. And the main thing is we want coverage for that early window of the spring when snakes are coming out from hibernation and they're moving towards their foraging habitats, their summer habitats. And so they're more likely to come across the boards. They're more likely to want to use the boards. Whereas in the summer, they use them, like the heat of the summer, they use them a little bit less. So there's that aspect. And then there's also just the aspect of having consistent data across all our sites. It's going to come up over and over again. This is a standardized monitoring protocol. It's a standardized project. We want to be able to compare our data between all of these different sites. And so we really want a minimum of 8 surveys if you're able to do that. We have for the past few years had our permits go through to September. So if you want to do more than 8 surveys, you can absolutely continue throughout the field season. We ask that you keep doing every 5 to 9 days. And I just want to remind folks that that doesn't mean you can do 8 surveys between May and September. The 8 surveys is still within those first 8 to 10 weeks, right? Spaced every 5 to 9 days apart. And then if you're continuing through to September, it's because you're doing more than 8 surveys. And then the other very important timing aspect to keep in mind is we do all of our surveys within a 2-hour window after sunrise or before sunset. So I'm going to explain that a little bit more because I know sometimes that can be a bit confusing for people. So what this means is that if your sunrise is at 5:30 in the morning, you can do the survey anytime between 5:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. So if you know it usually takes you 30 minutes to do that survey, you could start at 7 a.m. You're done by 7:30. That's great. If you think it's going to take you more like an hour and a half, that's pretty unusual. Like an hour is fairly common, but more than that is unusual unless you have really a lot of snakes. So, if you think it's going to be an hour, start at least an hour before the end of that survey window to give yourself plenty of time to be done within the window. And then for sunset, it's 2 hours before sunset. So you're never going to be doing surveys in the dark. It's not ideal for us. It's not ideal for the snakes. So for sunset, you can start your surveys anytime 2 hours before sunset. So if sunset is at 7:30 p.m., I guess it's probably going to be later than that for the most part, but let's say 7:30 p.m. is your sunset on the day you're doing your survey. You can start as early as 5:30 p.m. And, some of you are doing this for work, so it might be easier to be able to start right at the beginning of that survey window so that you're not out too late. Or if you have to drive a little bit further, you might prefer to get it done earlier. So generally for the evening window, I recommend starting right at that 2 hours before sunset mark. Then you're done a little bit earlier, then that's great. If you have to go right till sunset, that's fine too. So that's how that works. Hopefully that's clear. Again, if you start your survey, 1 hour after sunrise and it takes you a little bit more than an hour, you don't have to cut it off. You don't have to end right at the 2 hour after sunrise mark. But you shouldn't be starting at the end of the window. You want to give yourself time as much as possible to complete the survey within those 2 hour windows, after sunrise or before sunset. Okay, I see a clarifying question in here from Laura. First 8 surveys in the spring within 5 to 9 days of each other. If you want to continue, continue every 5 to 9 days. Don't extend the time between. Yes, that's correct. So really, the most important thing is the first 8 surveys should be absolutely spaced 5 to 9 days apart, starting in early May-ish, depending on where you are, every 5 to 9 days for 8 surveys in a row. After that, if you really don't have capacity in the summer, but maybe you have a little bit more capacity in the fall and you need to take a little hiatus in between, that is an option. But ideally, you're continuing every 5 to 9 days until you don't have capacity anymore. So whether that's 8 surveys, if that's 10, 12, 16, some people have done over 20 surveys in a season. That's great. Everything over the 8 surveys is like bonus data for us. It's really helpful. We can find information out about the neonates, the babies that are born in the late summer and early fall. So it's great to have that data. And you definitely don't want to be doing surveys more frequently than every 5 days, because at that point the boards are being disturbed too much. The snakes are going to be less likely to use them. But if you've done your 8 surveys and you want to do a couple more, but it has to be every 2 weeks or something like that, it's not the biggest deal. But yes, as much as possible, we want every 5 to 9 days, and especially for those first 8. Okay, that was a little long-winded, but I think you get the point, hopefully, by now. So I'm going to move into another thing that is sometimes a bit confusing for people, which is our stopwatch time or survey effort. So when we're doing the snake surveys, we want to be keeping track of our survey effort. And so on your data sheets, there's a section for stopwatch time. And I'm going to quickly say yes, because there's a question in the chat from Delaney. Will the presentation be shared? It will be. If you're not able to stay for the whole time, I will share the recording afterwards. And there's some people who I think weren't able to join today. So yes, we will be sharing it. Sorry, you have to miss the rest of it, Delaney, but thanks for coming. Okay. As I was saying, survey effort. The goal of the stopwatch time is to track how much time we spend looking for snakes. So when you're out there, you're doing your survey, flipping boards, looking for snakes, and you find a bunch of snakes under a board, you're going to then take quite a bit of time to write down what snakes you found. It might not be a lot of time if there's just one snake, but if you find, let's say, 5 snakes under a board, you're not looking for snakes anymore. You've got 5 snakes, you're writing down, this one's a garter snake, this one's a juvenile Decay's brown snake, this one's a milk snake. Like that time that you spend writing down data about the snakes is not survey effort. It's not time you're spending looking for snakes. And so we don't want to include that in the stopwatch time. So this is a little section from our cheat sheet that we have. It shows how, like, during the survey, you're going to start your stopwatch, and then you lift the cover boards, you check for snakes. If there's no snakes, you're recording that whole time. You're looking for snakes. You move on to the next one. You check for snakes. Keep recording that whole time. If you do find any snakes, that's when you're going to stop your stopwatch and spend however much time you need writing down the data for the snakes. So that gives you time to identify what species they are, check what age class they are, and identify their sex. And then after that, once you're done recording all the data, you're going to start the stopwatch again and move on to the next board and keep checking for snakes. So that way, if it takes you 5 minutes to go through all the snakes and identify them and write down the data, you're not recording that as 5 minutes of time spent looking for snakes. Okay. So Regan has a question in here about incidentals. That's a great question. Works the same way, basically. So for those of you who don't know, if you come across a snake or any herp incidentally during a survey, we do want you to record that data. And so it kind of depends. Sometimes, I'm walking from one board to the next. I see a frog. Let's say it's a leopard frog. I make note of it quickly and I keep going. Like it, but ideally, or like make note of it in my head. And then when I'm recording the next snakes, I add it in. Ideally, if you're seeing something incidentally, especially if it's a snake, you are maybe grabbing it to identify it, you should pause the stopwatch when you're taking down those notes. So same thing for incidentals as any other snake or amphibian or anything that you find during the survey or like under the boards. You want to record the time that you're looking for snakes. You want to record the time that you're walking between boards and maybe you're going to see incidentals, but you don't want to record the time that you spend writing things down. I also tell people when I'm training them, like if you see a really cool bird over there and you get distracted and you pause to go look at a cool bird or, something like that, that's also a time when you should pause your stopwatch. So maybe you're checking board 3 and you're about to move on to board 4 and you hear something calling. Pause your stopwatch, go over, take a look, check it out, identify the bird, whatever it is, and then come back to the survey, start your stopwatch again. So, or if you see a cool plant, you're stopping to take a photo of it, that kind of thing. The goal is for us to have a record of how much time you spend looking for snakes. So that's the function of the stopwatch. That's what we want to have recorded. We pause it anytime we're not doing that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Regan, did that answer the question you had about incidentals, or do you have anything else about incidentals? Great. Okay. Uh, all right. I have a question from Jeff about documenting woodland voles under cover boards. So anything that is not a reptile or amphibian, we don't ask you to identify. So really what we absolutely want you to identify is snakes, also skinks, if they're present at the site you're working at. But if there are there are often rodents or other things under the boards. If you're finding those and you know what they are, you can absolutely record that. But this isn't a long-term vole monitoring project. We're not collecting data on voles or mice or moles in a rigorous way. And so definitely that can be recorded incidentally. If you know what they are, that's great. But we don't want, we're not expecting you to be able to identify different small mammals and record their presence or not. But absolutely, if you know them, you can put that data in. That's great. Yeah, so they are listed as special concern, and so if you can, I would absolutely recommend taking a photo, posting to iNaturalist or submitting to the NHIC, Natural Heritage Information Center, if you want to record observations of woodland voles to contribute that to conservation, but it's not something we can't verify observations. We don't ask for photos of that. We're not identifying woodland voles. So definitely, submit observations to that through other ways, and you can include it in the data sheet if you want, but it's not the main goal of this project. Okay, so from Elise, there's a question about the stopwatch. Yes, I'll just go back to that slide. Be clear, we're pausing anytime we're making notes or examining, timing our journey from board to board, and the time we're scanning for snakes when we're lifting boards. That's exactly correct. Elise, thanks for putting that very clearly in there. You're pausing the stopwatch when you're making notes, you're identifying, etc. You want to keep track of the time from board to board and when you're looking for snakes. So, looks like you understand perfectly. That's great. All right, I'll give another second, see if any other questions are coming in, and then I will continue on. Okay, great second question from Elise here. Would it be redundant or conflicting to post photos of the snakes we find on iNat, or would that be helpful? So we prefer that you don't post them on iNaturalist because, well, I guess it's sort of up to you. I would say it's redundant, and there is a risk of observations being double counted. So especially for species at risk snakes. So, you know, if you're finding eastern hognose, eastern fox snake, even milk snakes, ribbon snakes, anything like that, those species, we submit those observations to the NHIC every year, and they also pull data from iNaturalist. So we don't want to have the duplicate situation happening. We are submitting that data to NHIC already. And so it's redundant, it's extra work. For other snake species or other herps that you find, like, you could submit them to iNaturalist if you really want to, but like, we're not pulling from that, so it doesn't affect our data in terms of duplication, but it is maybe a little bit redundant. So that's up to you on your end. Yes, definitely don't want to make it seem like there's more snakes than there are. Okay. If you have more questions, keep putting them in the chat, but I'm going to move on to the snake data at this point. So we talked a little bit about, what it looks like to look for snakes. What do you actually collect when you find them? So one thing that I want to remind folks of is if you're collecting data on a physical data sheet or you're using the Survey 123 form, we don't need you to record the board number and the time that you checked each board. If there's no snakes, there's no other reptiles or amphibians found under a board, you're not recording any data on anything found under the board or on top of the board. In some cases, we don't need you to write down the board number and the time. If you're doing physical data entry and you prefer to have that written down just to help you keep track of things, that's fine. But we prefer that you don't transcribe that when you're doing the data transcription, and that you don't do that for Survey 123. It gives us basically a bunch of empty rows, which is not very useful. So if there's no herps under a board, you don't need to write down the board number or record the time that you looked under the board. What you do need to do is, if there are any reptiles or amphibians found at a board, is record the species and the number of individuals of that species. And then if you are able to, if you're confident, you can also record the age class and the sex. So we have some resources for those. Sarah will put that in the chat. We have some quizzes to help practice identifying snakes and other herps as well. We have a quiz to practice visually sexing snakes. And then there's a table in the protocol about how to estimate the age class of a snake based on its size. So if you're comfortable with that, if you feel confident in estimating the sex and the age class, we ask that you do that. You can always put unknown, especially for sex. It's very difficult if you don't have a lot of practice to determine if a snake is male or female. So if you don't feel confident, you can always put unknown. That is totally fine. But yeah, we prefer that you don't just randomly guess. Age is a little bit easier to tell, so would be great if you can do that. But again, like, we don't want a random guess. We want you to feel fairly confident in what you're entering. The other thing that is really important is that we want the data to have separate lines for each individual that has any difference. So there's a spot where you can put in the number of individuals. So in this table here, you can see, for example, at board 9 at 7:12 p.m., there were 4 snakes. 3 of them were Eastern garter snakes, but they've been entered in 2 separate rows because 2 of them were adult females and 1 of them was an adult male. So what we don't want is to have 3 Eastern garter snakes, all adults, and then have like 2F, 1M in the sex column. What we want is to have, anytime there's a difference in the age, the sex, or the behavior, or the species, we want a separate row so that each of those has its own. Each cell has like one piece of information in it. So that is how we want that to be entered. On the other hand, like down here, board 12 at 7:18 p.m., there's an Eastern garter snake row where there's 5 Eastern garter snakes. They were all juveniles. You can put them all in the same row and just put 5 in the number of individuals. You don't need to split those up in that case. All right, I'm seeing some more. Oh yeah, okay, that's the list. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing those. Okay. Next, I just wanted to show some examples of photos that you might send to us. So we have an option to include photos either through Survey 123 or when you submit your data. We ask for any species at risk that you include at least 1 photo that shows the identifying features. So it doesn't have to be multiple photos if it's clearly shown. For example, this photo on the bottom right has a ribbon snake. You can clearly see the ID features, the light colored crescent scale in front of the eye on this one, for example. So that's a sufficient photo. It's for us to be able to validate that they are in fact the at-risk species that you think they are. And that also helps us when we're submitting data to the NHIC. So at least 1 photo of any species at risk, as good quality as you can, and making sure that it shows, the back of the snake or the pattern or the head, especially. There's a lot of ID features around the head. So, excuse me. So it's really, important that those ID features are visible in the photos so that we can confirm the ID. And then the other thing is, if you're unsure of the sex of a snake and you want to include a photo to help us, confirm that it's male or female, you can take photos like the bottom left or top right one over here. What's really helpful is if you keep the tail as straight as possible. I know it's difficult with snakes, they're very wiggly, but ideally you get that tail nice and straight. And that way it makes it a lot easier to be able to tell if a snake is male or female from a photo. Sometimes, it's always harder with a photo than when you see the snake in person. So sometimes a photo isn't going to help us no matter what, but definitely a wiggly photo from the side, those are not very helpful for identifying if it's male or female. So as much as possible, get that tail nice and straight. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is go through the digital data collection forms. So I'm going to switch to sharing my screen with the actual form open and talk about that for a little bit. But before we get into that, I just want to give you all a chance to ask any questions about everything I've talked about so far. So any questions about the protocol, the different things I've reminded you about, the way you're collecting data, the stopwatch time, the weather and timing guidelines, anything like that. If anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand. I'm going to just drink some water while I give you a second to do that. Okay, great question, Elise. Thanks. What are the different age classes we should be sorting into? So this is in the protocol, but and it's in the data sheets and the survey 123 form. So for most of you, if you're only doing surveys in the spring and early summer, it will just be juvenile and adult. If it's above a certain size threshold, if it's of maturity, we consider it to be an adult. Otherwise, like there's smaller size depending on the snake, obviously, it's going to be a juvenile. We don't do sub-adult. We just do juvenile and adult. And like I said, there's a table in the protocol that shows like for each species, this is the approximate size where you would consider it to be a juvenile. This is the approximate size where you would consider it to be an adult. If you do continue surveys into late July, especially August, early September, there may also be neonates. So neonates are the babies from that same year. So any snakes that haven't lived over a winter yet, they're born the same year that you're finding them, born or hatched, I guess. And so you may sometimes, well, if you do surveys in late August and early September, you definitely will see neonates and probably lots of them. They're very small. It's usually very clear that it's a neonate because they are tiny. And so at that point, that would be a third option. And again, you can always put unknown if you're not sure. But yeah, those are the three. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else at the moment. No hands up. No. Okay. Again, send questions in the chat at any point. That's totally fine. I'm going to get into the digital data collection side of things. So we're going to go through the forms themselves. It would be really great from our side of things to see as many of you as possible using the digital data collection. We really like it. We find it makes things a lot smoother for collecting the data, but especially for entering and transcribing the data. You don't have to take your written sheets and transcribe them into a spreadsheet and then email them to us. You just hit a button and it gets sent right to us. So it makes things nice and easy on that side of things. We use Survey 123. It's a free app. It's through Esri. So it's like a Esri online, ArcGIS Pro, all those things are connected. So it's totally free to use. You don't need any service or internet to be able to use it in the field. And then once you're back to somewhere where you do have service or internet, you can submit the data directly to us. So there's like a send button, and you can save it while you're in the field without internet, and then you can send it once you're back in service. And you can also view the surveys that you have submitted and edit them. But the one downside is that you can't download a copy of the data that you've submitted. So what we do is if you submit your data using Survey 123, is we will send you a copy of your data so that you have access to that. Yeah, that way, you're collecting the data, you still get a copy of it, even though you can't directly download it from Survey 123. So the QR code on the screen here will take you to the form itself. So if you haven't downloaded the Survey 123 app, you can go ahead and do that right now if you want. If you want to open the form and follow along, Sarah put a link to that in the chat. And then the link to the Survey 123 data form takes you to the same place as this QR code. So it takes you to opening the actual form on Survey 123. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, you should now be seeing my Survey 123 screen. Can I get some thumbs up if you're seeing that? Okay, thanks, Laura. So this is what it looks like. I'm showing you the app on a computer. You can get it on a phone or a tablet and use it that way, which is really convenient for the field. And the first thing I want to show you is for those of you who have done this before, who've already used the form, the LTMP Survey 123 form, you will get a notification from this year that there's an update available. And so you're going to want to click on that. It'll tell you which one has an update, and you can just hit download updates. It'll download them, and then you'll get the most up-to-date version. So there have been some changes, fairly minor changes to the form, but you should always be updating the form before you use it if there's a newer version. That way, you know, if there's extra information in there or anything has changed, your data is being submitted correctly. So just wanted to show you what that looks like. So the other thing you might notice if you've done this before is that there's a second form in here, the habitat survey form. I'll talk about that in a minute, but first I'm going to go through what the partner data entry form looks like. So when you have this open on your device, I should say, you don't need an account to be able to get to this. It's always going to have a homepage that says like sign in, but there is always an option to continue without signing in. So if you don't have an account or you don't want to use your account because it's linked to your work or something like that, you can always just hit continue without signing in, and it'll take you to your page with your forms. So that's the first step. Next is you're going to click on the form that you want to use and then click collect. And that will take you to a new form where you can fill out your information. So this form looks like this. This is the form you're going to use anytime you're doing a snake survey. If you choose to use Survey 123, it starts with some information about the survey itself. You know, the site name. It's really important that that is something identifiable. So please don't just put snake site. If you're not sure what the name of your site is, you can put, you know, the address or the park or the nature reserve or something like that, the nearest city, like something identifiable so that we know which site you're collecting data at. Then information about the survey number. So if it's your first survey of the year, second, third through 8, or even more. The names of the surveyors. The survey date will auto-populate with the current date. And then we also randomly generate a starting cover board. So this just makes it so that you're not always collecting data in the same order, because you know, you can imagine maybe you start your survey at board 1 every time. By the time you get to board 24, it's a little bit later and the snakes have left the board, or they've heard you coming and they've all skedaddled or something like that. And so we start at a random board every survey, and then you just continue in order from there, loop back to board 1 when you get to the end. But this will automatically generate a starting board for you. Then we start with collecting some weather data before the survey, air temperature, wind direction, and precipitation and cloud cover at the beginning. And then you record the start time of your survey. So if you click on this, it'll auto-populate the current time. You can also edit it at any point. And then it teaches you to start your stopwatch and begin your survey once you've finished collecting all that data. Then you click the arrow in the bottom right to go to the second page. Oops, I went all the way to page 3. Okay. Second page is where you record your data on observations. So you don't need to enter anything if you don't find any snakes or any herps, I should say. When you get to the first board where there is a herp underneath or your first incidental observation, let's start with cover boards, you click the plus. This will open a section where you can input data on a cover board where you found a herp. So this is for any snakes found under board, live, dead snakes, shed skins, and any other herps as well, especially skinks. Sometimes there's frogs, salamanders, anything like that. You enter the board number and the time of capture once. I'm going to do an example because it won't let me go to the next thing if I don't fill anything out. So let's say you're at board 2, it's 5:25 p.m., and you found one snake. So you're going to enter the board number, the time of capture. You come down here to the herp data section, and you can start typing, or you can choose from the list. So let's say you've got an eastern garter snake. You select that. It's a juvenile. With juveniles, you can't tell the sex, so it won't prompt you to input the sex. And let's say it was a live snake undercover. So we've got one garter snake under this board. That's everything that was at this board. There's nothing to comment on. I don't want to take a photo because it's a regular old garter snake, and there's nothing I need to take a photo of. That's it for this board. So at that point, you're going to press the plus below this section here, not this first plus. This is for more herps at the same board. You're going to go to the second one and press that plus, and it'll prompt you to put in the next board number. So that's how it works if you only have one snake or one herp at a board. Let's say now you get to board 5, you're inputting the board number and the time, and you've got multiple herps under this one. So at this point, you're going to put in, I've got eastern garter snake, that is juvenile, undercover, and there's 3 of them. You can hit the plus and minus to change the number. You can also type in how many there are. And then at the same board, there's more snakes, or there's more herps. Then you're going to press the plus right here, where it says press plus for more herps at the same board. And this time, if you scroll up, you'll see it still has the board number, it still has the time of capture for that same board that you're at. If it prompts you to put in a new board number and time of capture for the same board, you've hit the wrong button. So this hasn't reset, same board, same time. Now you can input more data. Let's say there was also a milk snake under this board. I'll put milk snake. Let's say this time it was an adult. Now it's going to ask me what sex was the individual. Let's say I couldn't tell. I'm going to put unknown, and I'm going to put undercover. And this time, just 1. So then if there were more herps at the same board, there's even more. You could hit the plus here and add another one. It'll let you go use these arrows to go back and forth between them. I shouldn't have done that. And you can also delete if there's extra. If you accidentally hit the plus and there's no more, you can delete the blank ones. But you can go back and forth between records at the same board. So here's board 5. I'm seeing the milk snake. And then if I go back, I'm seeing the garter snakes from the same board, board 5. If I scroll down to this set of observations, so here where it says press plus below for the next board, now I can go back to the previous board, the garter snake that was found at board. So I can also go between those. Usually you won't need to, but sometimes maybe you forgot to write something, or there was more snakes, or you want to double check that you entered everything properly. So you can go between. The other thing you can do is if you come across any incidental observations, they're not at the board, you're going to hit the plus under incidental observation. And this is very similar, except that it also has a coordinate section. So you can use the coordinates that it'll automatically pull. Now you can all see where I am in Toronto. It'll automatically pull coordinates. If you don't want to use those, you can hit the X and input them manually. So there's an option to input the UTM zone, easting, northing, or lat long. And then it has the same sort of section for the actual individual. So you can put in, if you found, let's say you came across a leopard frog, northern leopard frog in between the boards. It's an adult. Don't know the sex because I don't know how to tell for a northern leopard frog. And it was traveling. It was between the boards. We got one of those. So you can enter that like that. And then if you've got another incidental observation, you hit the plus down at the bottom there and add another one. You just keep doing that as you go through the boards, as you observe more herps, and enter all of them through these different sections. sections where you can hit plus to add, and you can use the arrows to navigate between them. Then when you're done checking all of the boards, you go to page 3. You can put the time when the survey has ended, and this is where you record the amount of time you spent looking for snakes. So this will be your stopwatch time. So you put in the minutes here and the seconds. So let's say it took us 18 minutes. If you are only recording minutes, you can leave seconds blank or put DNR. If you record seconds, that's great. Let's say it took us 18 minutes and 33 seconds on our stopwatch to look for the snakes. And then you enter weather information for the end. So this works the exact same way as the weather information at the beginning, but it's for the end of the survey. Yeah, and then there's a section right at the end for any comments about the survey overall. So that might be something like, I saw a woodland vole under board 3, or this coverboard 6 is starting to decompose, or there was a lot of wildfire smoke during the survey today, or anything like that. Anything also, like if there's something that it didn't have an option for you to enter somewhere in here, maybe you want to say, oh, it was raining earlier and there was also fog. It's only going to let you select one of those. Ideally, you should be picking the one that's most relevant, but if for some reason you want to add details, you have extra things you want to say, you can put that in the survey comments. Then the final section is any kind of disturbance. So this is either natural or anthropogenic disturbance or both. This might be something like a board is missing or was flipped, or it might be there were wasps building a nest under a certain board. This is where you can put, like, a lot of people have big ant nests appear under boards, so things like that can go under there as well. It could also be like, oh, there was a fire nearby, or maybe somebody, like a big branch fell near the boards, or there was somebody who seems to have been disturbing the boards, like visited and moved them around or something like that. So lots of different things that can fit in here. If you can, please take a photo of the disturbance and also record approximately when you think it may have occurred. So at this point, you can hit the little check mark down on the right. Because I didn't fill everything out, it's going to bring me back to the questions that are required. But if you have completed everything, you can hit the check mark and it'll give you an option to save to your outbox or to send it. And if you don't have internet connection, you won't be able to send it, but you can save it to your outbox and then send it at a later time. If at any point you want to save it as a draft, you can hit the X in the top. You can either save it as a draft, keep working on it, or close it and just discard it and lose your changes. So if you save it in your drafts, you can then see there's a draft section that's shown up here. I can go to my draft, I can click on the survey, and I can keep working on it. This isn't going to happen, probably won't be necessary very often, but it can be a good idea to save it occasionally. I think there was one occasion where someone lost their data mid-survey. The app crashed on them, and it does save locally regularly, so it should be able to restore your data if the app crashes. But in case that doesn't happen, it can be a good idea to just, maybe after you've entered the beginning data, close this, save in draft, and then reopen it and keep working on it. Then you have at least one copy, one version of it saved as a backup. And then you can also see here the sent folder. So this is where you can go in and open surveys that you've already submitted. So you can see here's an example of what that looks like. Yeah. Okay, there's a couple questions in the chat. I want to address those and then we'll keep going. So Laura's question about the order of observations. If I start on board 16 and walk to 24, can I go back to 15 and move backwards to 1 instead of going all the way back to board 1? Yes, that's fine. The main thing is you don't want to be checking the boards in the same order every time. But we don't want to be we didn't want to be annoying and make you check them in a totally random order. So yes, that's totally fine. Similarly, like if your starting board is board 24, you could start at 24 and work your way backwards down to board 1. The main thing is just that it's different every time. But yes, that's a totally fine option. And then Regan has a question, what about the condition of the board? Is that disturbance? So the disturbance is more for like external disturbance that might affect the snakes. I guess this could, I would probably put like a board rotting in the overall comments, like making a note that it needs to be replaced basically. But that's that. I would say that could go in either place and that would be fine. The main reason to note that a board is rotting, like really rotting away, from my perspective, is that that means it needs to be replaced. And so wherever you're putting that, like it's good to put that information somewhere where you'll see it and do something about it. Definitely a board that's really rotting is less likely to be used by a snake. So you could call that a natural disturbance, I guess. But yeah, I think you could argue either and that would be fine. Yeah. Sorry, that's not a very decisive answer. I guess if you want someone to make a decision for you, I would say put it in the overall comments, not in the disturbance section. But both of those are things that we look at when we're considering like what else might be a factor that's at play there. Okay. Are there any other questions about this form, what that looks like before we get into the partner survey? I guess I'll pull this back, or the habitat survey. Oh, no. Well, there we go. Okay. Feel free to put questions in the chat while I start talking about this. But we can also, if there's like specific questions about how to use it or questions specific to your site, like we can come back to that afterwards. But for now, I'm going to talk about something new, which is last year was our first year using Survey 123, and the digital or the habitat survey was not integrated into it. So now it is. We have a habitat survey form for the for Survey 123 as well, which is great. Hopefully that will make things easier for those of you using Survey 123. For those who don't know, we do a habitat survey as part of this program for each site on or around the fourth survey. So I usually recommend doing it when you go to the site for your fourth survey. Get there a little early or take a little bit of time when you're done your survey to also do a quick assessment of the habitat. So this is very high level stuff, general habitat data. It's going to take a little bit more time if it's the first year of surveys. After that, you can mainly be noting like any changes to the habitat since the previous year. And in this, there's also a space to record any changes to the coordinates of the boards. So It's a separate form. There's a separate link for it. You can download it to Survey 123 using the QR code that's on the screen here, or the links that Sarah sent in the chat. Also, I should have said there are instructions for using Survey 123, including the links to get to them and like a full run through of like how to go through entering all of the data and what all the fields should have. That will come to you with the protocol. So if you're like, I'm gonna forget how to do this, or I don't have the link, don't worry, you'll get it. But yeah, so this one's separate form, separate link, but it works the exact same way. So I'm gonna answer these 2 quick questions in the chat, and then I'll open this up and show you what it looks like. This one's quite a lot quicker. Liv, usually for 24 boards, it takes about 130, 140 meters of space, but that is like, you know, it can follow the curve of the habitat. So sometimes it's not like a straight line, 140 meters. If, you know, it's curving a little bit along the edge of forest or yeah, like whatever else, whatever other habitat features might come up. But yeah, usually it's about 130, 140 meters of space. The second question here is about the coordinates and if they are being moved intentionally. So Elise, great question. This is basically what we want is once a year, we want you to confirm, are the cover boards still in the same place? Or have we moved them intentionally? So if there's a disturbance related movement, you know, someone came in, they lifted a board, they didn't put it back. Maybe a bear came by and was moving the boards around. It's happened for some of you. Or, you know, something like that, where you're then moving the board back into its original location. You don't need to record that. This is if the boards are in the same location, you basically check that off, say, boards haven't moved since last year, no change to the coordinates. We just need a confirmation of that. If you have moved the boards on purpose or you've set up a new site, that's where we're going to want you to record the coordinates. So either, you know, like brand new coordinates for a brand new site, you're recording them in there, or maybe, you know, part of your transect was flooded and you're moving like the last 8 boards, you're shifting them over a little bit. And so they're going to be in a slightly different location. Then we want updated coordinates for those boards, or, you know, yeah. If it's like a permanent change, then we want updated coordinates. If it's a disturbance that you're rectifying, you're putting the board back, we don't need updated coordinates for that. Okay, I'm going to open this now. Should be able to see my survey 123 again. Thanks, Laura, for that thumbs up. Okay, so I'm going to open this time the habitat survey form. Same thing, there's a button to click collect. Open this up, and this one is only 1 page. It's a little bit simpler, but basically you put the site name, the people doing the survey, the date again will autofill, and then there's 2 main sections. One, you're going to put like the general habitat description of like where the transect is, and you're going to check off all of these different boxes for vegetation description. So, you know, is it a terrestrial or wetland habitat? Is it natural or anthropogenic, or both? All of these different things, you're just selecting the most appropriate option, including like what community class it is. This one has a bunch of options, so it's a drop down, and whether or not it's edge habitat. So you select the most appropriate option from there. And then the second section is, are there any anthropogenic features nearby? So how far is the closest one? And so that's like, that could be like the nearest road or building, or, you know, like maybe there's a quarry or an agricultural field that's actively farmed or something like that. So just a description of what that looks like. So that's it for the habitat survey. It's pretty high level. And then the other thing that is included in here is this check of whether the boards have moved or not. So there's a question, have any of the boards been moved since last year? If the boards are in the same location, you can just check that off. That's it. If you have any comments you want to add in here, there's a spot for that. That's all you have to do. If some or all of the boards have been moved, it's going to give you a whole bunch of fields to enter the coordinates and accuracy for each board. They're optional. If only some of the boards have been moved, you can just put in the new coordinates for some of them. So maybe only board one had to be shifted over because a tree fell down. You can just put in the new coordinates for board one. And then same thing, if it's the first year for a new site, check that box off and then input all of the coordinates for that site. In that case, you would want to put all of the boards for sure. Okay, I think that's it for this. It's, there's a lot of fields because it's a lot of boards. You got to put in all the coordinates, but for the most part, hopefully most of you will, in most years, just be checking off, nope, boards are in the same location, no updates to the coordinates, and that's it. And again, you press the check mark to submit the data. Okay, I'm going to keep it on this for now. The next slide that I have is just a question slide. So I'll leave this open in case anyone has specific questions about this, and I can pull it up and show you. But for the next 13 minutes, we have time to answer questions. Anyone wants to raise their hand, go for it. If you want to put a question in the chat, that's really fine as well. Maybe what I'll just do is I'm just going to put this up, go to my last slide, and thank all of the many partners and funders who made this project possible. This particular event has been funded by the Hodgson Family Foundation, and I'll put up at the end, or I'll put it up here now, but I'll put it up again at the end, this QR code just to put in any feedback. So there's like an evaluation form with a couple of questions about any barriers you might have to participating, and like how we can support you in participating and what you thought of the event, that kind of thing. I'll put it back up again at the end. I'm just putting it up now so that it's in the recording, and then what we can do is just end the recording and we can go over any questions like specific to people's sites or anything like that. In just a moment. Before we end the recording, Liv has a question that I think might be relevant to lots of people. So, since the water levels are likely going to be high this year, if there's no space to relocate the boards or a single board, do we need to relocate the whole transect? So, I would say this is a very context-dependent question. If you have a site that has been set up for a long time, it's in a location where doesn't usually flood, normally everything is all good, it's dry enough for snakes, but water levels are really high this year and it's flooded or wet for this year, I would say don't move the boards. You might want to wait a little bit longer for things to dry out before you start surveys, or you might want to move like the wettest boards over a little bit like for this year, or even for future years. But it's probably a one-off situation, and probably like if this is a really high water level year, it's not going to be it won't necessarily be a problem again in future years. So I wouldn't relocate your full transect because of that. If it's a new transect, thanks for coming, Colleen. No worries about leaving at this point. If it's a new transect, you've just set it up and it seems like it's going to be really flooded and it's, it might be a problem for the future. I would definitely consider maybe adjusting the location. It's something that I think Liv, if you think this is going to be an issue for you, let's have a conversation about that, about your options. But I think in general, considering is this going to be a long-term issue or is this going to be just an issue for this year or maybe only part of this year, and then it will resolve, in which case like it's better to keep the boards where they are, where snakes have already, left scent trails to them, where that they are like in a good location, and like we can get consistent data from multiple years. So if it's going to be a permanent problem, let's reassess. If it's going to be a temporary problem, then it can probably stay in place. Okay. Is there a standard app or method of obtaining coordinates that you prefer us to use? So ideally, we would like you to use a GPS if you have access to a GPS. Otherwise, whatever you can use is fine. The point of having like that question about what method did you use and what is the accuracy is that it gives us a better understanding of like how accurate those coordinates are. So if Laura, if there is, if you have access to a GPS, if you're able to use whatever the most precise thing you can use, the most accurate thing you can use, that's best. But it's not, people have lots of different abilities, lots of different accesses to like different levels of accuracy when it comes to collecting coordinates. So like whatever you can use is fine. But definitely like as accurate as possible is great, and just fill in that information so that we know. One thing we can do potentially is like we have access to GPSs, and so if the best you can do is like 100 meters level accuracy, maybe we can organize a time for someone on staff to come out and do a site visit and like help you collect the coordinates or something like that. So, we're happy to support in whatever way we can, but basically whatever you have available to you is fine. Cool. Okay, I'm going to maybe just have Sarah end the recording at this point. And then I'll keep answering questions.